All right, so the South is rising again. The Confederacy is rising again. And why do I say that? Because Virginia School Board votes to restore Confederate names to 2 schools. And the reasoning is, basically, it's just that. Well, let me just get to the article. A Virginia school board voted Friday to restore the names of Confederate military leaders to a high school and an elementary school 4 years after the names were removed amid nationwide protests calling for a reckoning over racial injustice. Which makes sense because as much as people are desperately trying to not make this about slavery, it was about slavery. It's in the Confederacy's own charter. It was about slavery. So, obviously, if you're a black student in one of these schools, of course you're not going to feel comfortable. You're not going to feel welcome. Because, this community is honoring the person who would have enslaved you. So, in a reversal experts believe was the first of its kind, Shenandoah County School Board voted 5-1 to rename Mountain View High School as Stonewall Jackson High School and Honey Run Elementary as Ashby Lee Elementary, which is what they were before the names were changed in the first place. Friday's vote reversed a decision by the school board in 2020 when school systems across Virginia and the South were removing Confederate names from schools and other public locations in response to the Black Lives Matter movement. The Southern Poverty Law Center's Intelligence Project, which maintains a database of more than 2,000 Confederate memorials nationwide, is not aware of another case of a school system restoring a Confederate name that was removed, said senior research analyst Rivka Meislish. Overall, the trend toward removal of Confederate names and memorials have continued, even if it has slowed somewhat since 2020, she said, noting that the Army renamed 9 installations named for Confederate leaders and removed a Confederate memorial from Arlington National Cemetery. And to be honest, even if it was a states' rights thing and not about slavery, the whole point of the Confederacy was they were trying to secede from the Union, which means they were traitors to the Union. So why are we honoring these people? In Virginia, local governments have been banned from removing Confederate memorials and statues until the law was changed in 2020, though the statute did not apply to school names. On Friday, school board members who voted to restore the Confederate names said the previous board ignored popular sentiment and due process when the names were stripped. And considering the outcry of having the names reverted, I'm going to call bullshit on that one. Elections in 2023 significantly changed the school board's makeup, with one board member writing in an op-ed for the Northern Virginia Daily that the results gave Shenandoah County the first 100% conservative board since anyone can remember. And that should tell you everything there is about what's happening. This has nothing to do with due process or popular opinion. They just don't like that the Confederacy is losing again. Now, you could claim that popular opinion has obviously changed because there is a 100% conservative school board, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't popular opinion when the ruling was made. It just means that obviously now things have changed. Or maybe they didn't realize that they were going to do this, which I don't know what planet these people live on, but okay. That board member, Gloria Carlinio, said during the 6-hour meeting that began Thursday night that opponents of the Confederate names should stop bringing racism and prejudice into everything because it detracts from true cases of racism. I'm going to 100% say she's white and wouldn't know racism if it bit her in the ass. I actually had someone in one of my groups tell me that Obama brought racism back. And yes, this was a white woman. Because obviously, racism only exists when she hears about it. Not that it wasn't occurring without her knowledge. So yeah, I'm going to call bullshit again. Stop bringing racism? No. Confederacy was all about racism and prejudice. This is not something that, and what does she consider a true case of racism exactly? I would love to know what she considers a true case of racism. Because this is what the Confederacy freaking stood for. Now, granted, if you want to point out that those who were abolitionists were still, most of them were still racist, you can make that argument. Just because they didn't think you should own a human being doesn't mean that they weren't racist towards blacks. That is a thing that happened, but it's still racism. It doesn't mean that what the Confederacy was doing was any less racist. The lone board member to vote against restoring the Confederate names, Kyle Goodshall, said he respected both sides of the debate but believed a majority of residents in his district wanted to leave the Mountain View and Honey Run names in place. Wow, it's so unusual to have a conservative who's reasonable. It's been so long since we've had that. Well, I shouldn't say it's been so long. It's just very rare now. I don't judge anybody or look down on anybody for the decision they're making, he said. It's a complex issue. What the hell is complex about it? You're honoring traitors. Even if you didn't bring race into it, you're honoring freaking traitors. What the hell? During several hours of public comment, county residents spoke up on both sides of the issue. Beth Ogle, a longtime resident with children in the school system, said restoring the Confederate names is a statement to the world that you do not value the dignity and respect of your minority students, faculty, and staff. Exactly. I actually heard one saying that this makes us sound like racist rednecks. And yeah, it does. Kenny Wakeman, a lifelong county resident, said the Stonewall Jackson name stood proudly for 60 years until 2020, when he said the actions of a rogue police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota, prompted a move to change the name, a reference to the killing of Floyd that propelled nationwide protests and debate over racial injustice. Right, because racism isn't systemic at all. What the hell, dude? And stood proudly? It might have stood proudly, but that's because you ignored the discomfort of minorities. So just because you were not aware of how Confederacy is spelt from Black Americans doesn't mean that those sentiments weren't there. It just means that this gave them an outlet to say this is wrong. It's just No. It's just like I mentioned about that one group member who seemed to think that if she didn't see racism, it didn't exist. Or in this guy's case, oh, it's a one-off thing. I mean, it's so unusual for racism to happen. It screams that you just don't see it. And of course, I'm sure that this person is white. Because again, in a lot of people's minds, if they do not see it, it does not exist. Which is, just because it's not your experience doesn't mean other people don't experience it. You probably don't experience it because you aren't the target of it. Anyway. Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson was a Confederate general from Virginia who gained fame at the First Battle of Bull Run near Manassas in 1861 and died in 1863 after he was shot and had his arm amputated. Jackson's name was also removed from another high school in Virginia's Prince William County in 2020 that is now known as Unity Reed High School. Still, I do not care what his accolades are during the Civil War. The fact remains that the Confederacy tried to leave the Union. And that is treason. That is traitorous. So even if we didn't bring race into it, it's still a traitorous act. Why? Why do you think that this is okay? I understand that he was a famous person from Virginia, but he was an infamous person from Virginia, not someone to look up to. Ashby Lee is named for both General Robert E. Lee, a Virginia native who commanded Confederate forces, and for Turner Ashby, a Confederate cavalry officer who was killed in battle in 1862 near Harrisonburg, Virginia. Oh boy. A high school near Harrisonburg is also named for Ashby. The resolution approved by the school board states that private donations would be used to pay for the name changes. Well, at least that. But still, no. Shenandoah County, a largely rural jurisdiction with a population of about 45,000, roughly 100 miles west of the nation's capital, has long been politically conservative. In 2020, Republican Donald Trump won 70% of the presidential vote in Shenandoah, even as Biden won Virginia by 10 points. In Virginia, local governments were banned from removing Confederate memorials and statues until the 2020 law lifted those restrictions. Statues of Confederate leaders, including Lee, Jackson, and Confederate President Jefferson Davis, were removed from Richmond's famed Monument Avenue in 2020 and 2021, following protests and vandalizing of the statues. Maislish from the Southern Poverty Law Center said it's unusual, though not unprecedented, that conservative jurisdictions like Shenandoah removed Confederate names in the first place. She said that while there's no evidence other jurisdictions have restored Confederate names or monuments, she is always concerned about people who work to continue to promote lost cause propaganda. All right, so that is all I have for that article. And I think I said everything that I needed to say about it. So with that, I will see you guys in the next video.